Welcome to a interview with Clear Mountain and our good friends Willa, Thāniyā, and Elizabeth Day. So good to have you both with us.
Yeah, we're very pleased to be here with you both.
Yeah, thank you.
So, a brief introduction. Both Willa, Thāniyā, Reid, and Elizabeth Day were trained in the monastic lineage of the Thai forest tradition, in which teachers offer Dhamma reflections in response to the present moment, the here and now Dhamma. They speak informed by the graduated teachings of the Buddha, drawing on primary texts relevant to the unfolding inquiry of Dhamma. They live in Kihikihi, where they have established a practice community. They teach locally in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and internationally primarily in the Pacific Northwest, near us. Elizabeth works as a professor of psychotherapy and also offers individual therapy and Dhamma guidance. Willa is currently in the process of retiring, allowing her to further orientate to providing Dhamma guidance. They are intending to spend next year offline in meditation retreat. Appreciating that time is short, they will be cultivating what is most precious, but we managed to get them before that. So, Willa, Eliza, it's so good to have you on. We first encountered you in person at Aloka Vihara several years ago, and since then have just maintained these warm connections, and then realized we hadn't interviewed you yet and thought that was just absurd. And we're so glad to finally be able to have you meet our community and our community to meet you.
Yeah. So lovely to be with our venerable brothers and have a conversation after such a long time.
Yeah, and to really see the flourishing of your community and what you're offering. So, yeah, just it's such a joy.
Maybe to begin with, instead of a full-on biography, I wondered if you two might share some key moments of inspiration and faith in your life that guided you on your dharmic path. So a few of those landmarks that kind of stand out in highlight. Maybe beginning with, well, whichever one of you would like to begin.
Well, maybe I can begin. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think if I stop and think about it, my life now feels long, but if I really recognize where my impulse to Dhamma comes from, it comes from when I was really little. And I lived with a Buddha Rupa, and amongst all the kind of chaos and loss of my childhood, there was something about the Buddha's ongoing smiling. This Rupa smiled that was a great solace to me. And I did at that age, like many of us, I was doing meditation. We seem to when we're little. And I had real understandings both of the qualities of the Buddha in terms of metta and also that present moment falling away of everything, which brought a kind of sense of fearlessness. So I guess the impulse to the Buddha Dhamma was there for as long as I can remember. But I did have a time in my 20s where, there was no Buddha Dhamma around at all as far as I could find it, but there was Hindu teachings, and my sisters and I had cultivated in terms of different Hindu practice paths, Swami Vivekananda and others, and I was doing a lot of meditation, like hours and hours, and really doing the practices that bring the mind in union with Brahma, some more the formless jhanas, and it was just so incredibly painful to have these very elevated qualities of mind and then no way of making sense of my world. And I was living in Palmerston, North Palmy at the time, and I was standing on a street doing something, and I saw a monk, actually it was Ajahn Buddha Dhamma, get into a car. And there's just this huge feeling that overwhelmed me that there was a path out of suffering. So from then I took myself to the monastery, I took myself to Thailand where Ajahn Chah's still alive. It was just, there was no doubt about what I had to do and where I needed to be. So maybe that's enough. I mean, as you know, as we go along, things just keep reinforcing it. Confidence in the path. But I guess those were two kind of seminal things in the sense of having felt lost and suddenly being found.
That's perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Willa. And Eliza, are there any moments in your upbringing that really come to mind right now?
There are some key moments in childhood that come to mind, because my very first fully formed memory is in a Buddhist temple in Malaysia. We were living in Malaysia and taken to a temple, and I remember being drawn to this figure, this upright figure who was obviously in meditation, and I stood in front of her and looked up at her face, and she must have felt me right in the face and opened her eyes, and I just felt this wash through my whole being of metta, I guess. It was something that kind of nearly blew me away, and something I've never forgotten. I certainly knew what it was like to feel loved in my family. This had a different quality to it that was that stayed with me as something of importance. And recently I've turned 60, and I was sharing with my family that when I was about to hit another zero age, 10, you know, people made a lot of 10 back then, like, oh, double figures, you're coming to double figures. And I remember thinking, what does that mean? What's double figures? Why is everyone making a fuss? What do I have to do? You know, like, what is this turning 10 all about? And I remember contemplating what's changing, you know, and there was the sense of the body. I'm growing up. My body's not like it was when I was 6 or 4 or 2 or 1, or not to speak of 0 or before then. And, you know, the mind's changing. I could see that. But then there was this sense of recognition of this intimacy, this sense of me, or I am, or subjectivity. And I remember thinking, that kind of feels more like a continuity. That feels a bit more like something that doesn't really age. What's that about? And starting to get a sense of there's something really important here to investigate and come to understand. So those were kind of key points in childhood. There were other ones. Children are quite connected, aren't they? And so other moments. But and then in my learning about death, when my grandfather died, and just a sense of lying down and reflecting on that, and the body just heart pumping, different fluxes and flows in the body, but recognizing this isn't me, this is just going its own way, you know. And just these sort of moments, in existential moments, that got me. I was quite a contemplative young thing, and unfortunately I didn't have a Buddhist context in which to make sense of some of these inquiries, but I started to notice my breath all the time present, and I was complaining to my mother, my breath gets in the way of my thinking. What's that all about? And she ended up taking me to her GP, who was a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner who taught me some meditation when I was young. So there were moments like these, but there was always a sense of the absurdity of everyday life, and probably lastly, a really key point for me was around the age that children are being really strongly gendered. I remember thinking, this is absurd. There's nothing in this. There's no substance to this. I don't understand what people are going on about. Are you a boy or a girl? I used to be asked. It's like, neither. You know, not sure. What does that mean? And anyway, that led me into an inquiry when I went through my university years into non-self, consciousness and non-self. And so I started my doctoral research, my PhD, looking at this question through a literary lens, actually. I won't bore you with the reasons and details of why. And then through that inquiry, I started to practice meditation. And when I when I read the suttas and some of the core Buddhist teachings, it just came with such clarity and sort of obviousness in a way that it set a lot of those other inquiries to rest. I still finished the PhD under sufferance, but I'd moved into a different frame for inquiry that I've stayed with ever since.
Could each of you maybe take us on through the next steps, talking about this initial, just spontaneous, natural affinity with something divine or something more meaningful as a child, and then maybe not having so much context for it, and then Thāniyā seeing this monastic, and then Eliza with just moving in the direction of meditation. Each of you did eventually go into ordination in the Ajahn Chah tradition. Could you speak about that next step, how this initial energy got channeled? Maybe starting with Eliza, if you'd be willing.
Oh, sure. Really what comes to mind is a pilgrimage to India. Actually, so I was practicing at the Buddhist Society of Victoria, maybe for about 7 years at that point, 5 to 7 years, and there were some really wonderful teachers there for me through those years. And one of them, Rakita Terra, was in the Forest Hermitage in Kandy, or had come out to spend some time in Australia, and he invited a group of us to go on a pilgrimage. And I remember thinking, I was in my 20s, that's a bit religious, that's a bit edgy, I'm not sure. But really having a longing to go. And there were some obstacles. I'd just started a job and I didn't have the cash for tickets up front. And then I received an email, a mail in the post back then of a credit card from my bank. That was in the days when they were just trying to build up customer, just sending out credit cards. So I thought, well, that'll be handy for the tickets. And then I went to my workplace and said, I know I've just been here for 4 or 5 weeks, and we're understaffed and all of that, but I'm actually going on a pilgrimage to India for 5 weeks. Is that okay? I am going, and the manager said, okay, see you when you get back. So no real obstacles, and had 5 weeks with a group, 4 in India, 1 in Sri Lanka, and we were living on the 8 precepts, so living as a small travelling sangha with this monk whose teachings I found really very transformative. And something shifted, and coming back to Melbourne, a city that I love and where I am at the moment for a few months, it just felt very landscaped and kind of disconnected from the world. And I'd been in India, where life is really lived in the raw, but touched the earth at those sacred places, and that really clinched it. I had a partner at the time, and we felt similarly. We'd been practicing together for years, 7 years or so, and we decided actually wanting to do this full time, wanting to live this life in a full-time way. So made the moves towards, I think a couple of years later, got our lives in order and went across to Amaravati in England. And I was there for about 6 years all up. Amaravati and Chithurst. Yeah.
Willa, Thāniyā, would you like to continue and say your trajectory, and then both of you can also interested in seeing how you kind of came to where you are at the moment as well from there?
Yeah, so there I had this really, it still moves me, this sight, one of the 4 signs really, and it was just so powerful. So then there's no question. I thought, well, who is this? Where are they from? Kind of, and found out, and then realised there was a monastery about a couple of hours south, Bodhinyana, just really starting to get established. And so I spent time there. But it was really funny, because the first night, first morning I was heading down, I got a phone call about 6 o'clock in the morning from my mother. And she said, I've had this terrible nightmare. You have to tell me it's not true. I've had this terrible nightmare. You're a Buddhist. So that set the scene for other events in my life. But it was just so funny when you realise, these energies are really powerful. Mind is really powerful. And so I went down, practiced there. It was a monk's monastery. Ajahn V was really wonderful. even Ajahn Karunaka was there at the time. But it was very clear they did not feel they could ordain women. So Ajahn B said to me, you'll have to go somewhere else. If you come back after 10 years, we'll make a place for you. So I thought, okay. So naturally my next movement was to Thailand. Luang Por Chah was still alive. So that was a really powerful draw, because teachings that most of the teaching wasn't, of course, present yet, but Bodhinyana was available, and his directness and the quality really of the forest traditions teachings really just spoke to my own affinity with the natural world and a kind of practical, sensible kind of way of approaching Dhamma. And so I went to Thailand, was there at Wat Baan, Anachat, Wat Kun, around in that area for 6 months. So then Lumpur, the different teachers there said, well, you have to go to England, which was one of the places I promised myself I'd never have to go. Ajahn Sumedho turned up, and I requested permission to go to England to practice there, and he granted permission. Later I realised he wasn't in a position to do such a thing, but it's actually a community thing. But he said, yes, please come. So then I'd already committed to go on pilgrimage to India for a number of months, so I did that. It was really profound. I'm glad I didn't just go to the monastery, but did my Indian pilgrimage, sat under the Bodhi tree for days and weeks, and then really went back to New Zealand, got my things in order, tried to get a visa to go to England, and eventually came through, and then was in Amaravati for the first year or so, then down at Chittorth, then took ordination. Actually, most of my time, about 18 years, was at Chittorth Monastery, which a forest monastery, so I felt very at home in the mud. It was a real mark of the kind of English lanes and English forests, and yeah, very, very precious time.
And what drew you both, to where you are now, and how have you found the ways to integrate those Dharmic principles into a life as lay teachers as well, and practitioners in a different context?
Yeah. Well, maybe I just flow on. The leaving the monastery, is really, I guess, certainly for me, it's the same for Eliza, it's a kind of heartbreak.
So we had to switch cameras, just in case people are wondering why we look completely different now. But Eliza and Willa, maybe to just continue with the theme that you touched on, when you move through those times of heartbreak, whether it's from, I think many people have had moments on their path where they've felt lost or lost faith in a community or a teacher or a teaching even. How have you sustained yourself through those dark times? And what advice would you give to others moving through them?
Yes. Well, maybe Liza will have her own answer to that, but for me, it's a case of, in a way, you've got to get your arms around, in a way, your arms around your heart. How do you hold that in a way and come into presence and compassion with it, rather than into that place of, oh, this is wrong, it shouldn't be happening. Actually, this is the way things are. And be able to actually metabolize and understand the conditionality of what's happening. rather than blaming it outward, blaming it inwardly, just come into right relationship. And that I think we have to be cultivating day in, day out with small things, big things, so that the heart actually has the strength to just remain present, even with the things that are most devastating. And I've found things don't have the same, they're not as raw as they once were in my early life. When I was younger, there's much more emotional strength to what happened. But at that time, I really found chanting and devotional practices life-saving, bowing, chanting, and I used to have things I chanted, like recollections of the epithets of Nibbāna, and they were like medicine. Even though there is this turbulence, it's not the only thing present at this moment. There is awareness. Nibbāna is present in every moment. So to keep this capacity not to be drowning in conditions, to always maintain a reference to the unconditioned, seems to be critical.
Thank you so much. Eliza, please add to that.
Yeah, the heartbreak of existing in this world, really. It's full of heartbreaks, isn't it? And, Willa spoke about the heartbreak of leaving the monastery. I equally felt just devastated. So I left despite wanting to give my life to that form. And I realised in the leaving, I'd given my life to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and that took different shape and different form. So I think dealing with heartbreak is personal, for each of us. But when I think about my practice life, I think there are so many facets to practice. There's the deep intimacy of practice. There's the social element of practice, psychological, physical, environmental, and these are all supports. The Buddha touched the earth at that powerful moment of doubt. It's presented as Mara, an external force, saying, "What right do you have? Prove that you have a right to awaken." But that doubt and that touching the earth gesture, I found profoundly resonating and supportive for the embodiment of practice. And when we live in some kind of harmony with the cycles of the seasons and the cycles of life around us, then the environment offers supports as well, people in our lives. So there's a sense for me that we need to find whatever medicine gets us through painful loss. But in the case of leaving the monastery, there are different losses, but in the case of leaving the monastery, it was a deep reinforcing of where the practice really sits. And so it was in the end, it's a helpful process as well. And I think for many people, when you talk about the kind of loss of trust or faith in a teacher or teaching, that's its own particular kind of pain. And, again, it can be, once one has the supports one needs at the human level to move through the pain of that, there's the possibility to really come more fully into owning is not really the truest word, but owning one's practice, that sense of continuing to deepen, because this is a path inward, if we want to use that metaphor, and outward supports, if we continue with the metaphor of in and out, are a part of that. But as the Buddha said in his last breath, each one of us, we may do it for the benefit of all beings, the benefit of ourselves, the benefit of both, but we have to do the work, each of us, don't we? And so there are stages in practice there can be for people, as we know, where there's some projection outwards to a great teacher or whatever it might be, a great person, someone we look up to. All of that has to go. All of it goes at some point. And sometimes it goes before we feel ready, goes for different reasons. But, we can, I think that gratitude is a very powerful support as well. We can be grateful for the support we've received. It's not to be taken for granted, and it's not there for everybody. So there's the preciousness of the opportunities we've had, mourning the losses, and then here's the path again. It hasn't gone anywhere. The Dhamma, here and now, apparent, outside of time. So coming back to remembering these things in and amongst all the other supports that we might need as quivering humans on this planet that's spinning in space.
Thank you both for being so honest and upfront, forthcoming about that pain. And Willa, there's a book called Awakening Present that I think came out in 2005 or 2006 with different Siladhara from the Ajahn Chah community in England. And you have an essay in there, I think, called Here, Mara, Sparklers, and Awakening, or the present moment. And it's a really fun article, which was probably a talk. And in there you talk about Sangha. You talk about Sangha as the movement to actualize the quality of awakening. Could you say more about that? It's very poetic and very beautiful, and it rings true, but I'd love it if you could talk more about that movement to actualize.
Yeah, it's like, what do we mean when we take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha? Yeah, so we can think of them as a historical Buddha. We can think of the teachings, which are really beautiful, that we are inheritors of. We can think of the Sangha as those practicing, or the Arya Sangha, those who have had realization. There are different ways of considering that, and all of them are helpful. But to me, the most critical thing is that quality of the Buddha knowing the Dhamma, the sense of knowing the way things are, and having that as refuge, so that in any moment, whatever is going on, we can wake up to what is here. And I would say that is the gesture of Sangha. It's the lived reality of that practice, the embodied moment by moment living of the Buddha knowing the Sangha. Not knowing the Dhamma is really what Sangha is. It's a live practice, so that it's here. It's just not. It doesn't mean I have to be sitting with other people, or though that's really helpful. But to know every moment of waking into presence has the three refuges present, I find really helpful. So I'll sit and there's a sense of really feeling the lineage of teachers and Cha, Ajahn Sumedho, Ajahn Sucitto, Ajahn Chandrasiri, my sisters and brothers in practice, right back to Man, the Buddha himself, and feel like here we are in this flow of waking up. And it's flowing forward, But in every moment, the refuges are fully here. So I guess that sense of not having them as some abstracted external thing, but as a moment by moment lived reality.
I'm was just talking about Sangha and that embodiment of these qualities of knowing and the awakened mind in a human being. I feel there's a very clear resonance and important conversation adjacent to that, just about loving kindness. And you even talked about us trembling human beings or quivering human beings. And as you both know, the word anukampa, which is one word for sympathy in Buddhism, means to tremble alongside. And metta, for recently, it's just been a very powerful recollection for me. But one issue I've had with it in the past, I know others have, is you find a metta phrase that works for a time and then it kind of stops working for a long time. And you find things are dry again. But it's such a powerful quality of heart. And we recently were talking to teachers who said that metta isn't a mental event. It's you kind of tuning into something very, very profound. What skillful means would you give people for maintaining that doorway open to that depth of heart when it seems to close so quickly for most of us?
You know, those heart qualities are so critical to practice, aren't they? You know, the Buddha saying that he moved from these qualities in interaction with others. This is how to live, actually. On the recent pilgrimage to India, I took with us a chant, metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, and we used that as a support for practice, for coming back to refuge, as a way to manage the onslaughts of everyday travel through India, such a large population, so much going on, and you know, people seem to find that a very deep support. It's one of my main practices. You know, the cultivation of the Brahma Vihara, it's something that we both practice and teach quite a lot. So to your question, I mean, how do we maintain a heart open when, like that metaphor of the cow at the crossroads, you know, skinless with flies landing, the kind of pain of embodied sensitive humanity, right? The tendency for the heart to close. I don't think of metta as an add-on. I don't think of it as a series of phrases. I think of it, or I experience it, as a deep energetic flow. And so I have found it helpful in the past when I was first learning the practice, or really coming back to what's natural in the heart, this notion of kindling, you know. So there can be phrases, if that's helpful. May all beings be well, peaceful, happy. May this being be well, peaceful, happy. There can be phrases, but there can be images, but it's whatever brings us to heartfulness and allows that quality to reveal itself. And that quality has an energy with it that can flow through the body. It's an embodied experience. And so the way I teach it, the way I hear Willa teaching it, though we have some variations, is around this kindling, this energetic quality that's always present beneath the waves. Feeling it, learning to recognize it. For some, it might feel that it can change, but it might feel like the coolest of breezes. It might feel like a tingling or a sort of seeping warmth, but trusting and recognizing how it shows up. And keeping it in heart, keeping it in mind, using the breath to amplify can be very helpful, and to disperse through the body. A bit like working with pitta in anapanasati practice, with piti. So massaging it through the body until the body's absolutely steeped in, permeated with this quality, this energetic quality, and then it radiates out like it has no choice, like the fragrance of a flower as it blooms. It radiates out, and then there can be intention alongside that to direct it, send it into ever widening circles or whatever, however works for you, to keep it growing and keep it bring it towards boundlessness. So if I had to think of it as an idea, it wouldn't work, because there's other ideas competing, ideas about how the politics are in this country at the moment, or how whatever is, and those ideas jostle it. But metta isn't just another idea adjacent to these ideas, and that can be a risk, I think, sometimes when people grasp it as some concept. Now I've got to be mettaful as well as everything else. How do I become that? And identity gets in the way and co-opts it. So it's coming back to what's very natural, and having trust and confidence, getting tastes of it and allowing it to grow and permeate the body, so it becomes a lived experience that's delicious and inviting us to return again and again.
I'll just add a little. What if we considered it more as being friendly with everything that's here? That whatever is whatever experience is coming into her awareness, there's no contention with it. It's just this deep friendliness for everything that's manifesting.
And that's an embodied friendliness,
Yeah.
a felt experience.
That's right, a kind of softness, a softening into everything, rather than an armoring or hardening.
Could you each give us one of those fire starter kindling recollections that's worked a lot? Recently, I've been thinking about all the little beings around me and just the ones that no one thinks about, and that's really gotten me every time. I've heard baby owls as a good go-to. Could you each give us just one kind of gem to take away with us that kind of can open the door for both of you, or be the fire starter if things are a bit soggy in there?
To be honest, it tends to be just an invocation now, metta, and there it is. But I did hear one of my first teachers was saying, he was from Burma, Ujjottika, a brother monk of Utejaniya, and he was saying, I'm really surprised. He was so metaphor, and he was saying, I'm really surprised that some Western practitioners, Western oriented practitioners, have trouble finding love in here, or loving themselves and others. And he said, I asked a woman, can you just invoke love for, yourself? No. How about for a family member? No. How about for, no. And then how about for a little puppy? Okay. So she started to practice with the innocence of a little puppy. That image for her touched that loving part of the heart. So it's anything in our lives. I mean, this is going to be really corny and schmaltzy, but for me it was my mother when I first started practicing, because I love my mother. My mother's showered me with love all my life, and so there's a kind of immediate feeling of love. No relationship's uncomplicated, but I could very much and still can very much tune into that love that was shown to me by my mother. And then just that sort of sense of, I used to always pray for my family when I was a young Catholic girl, pray for each of them every night and send them light. And so that sense of invoking family and light has been very helpful. I know that won't be the case for people where family feels more complicated. So it can be the Buddha, it can be anything can trigger love.
Yeah. After a long time, it's just there, isn't it? It's a more natural way to meet the world. But if I'm feeling a kind of that quality of arati, or a kind of greyness, then just to come into my own trembling, but the trembling of the world, then it just arises. Actually what it's like to be manifest, where you're in a form that's going to disintegrate and bring pain, and every other being shares that. So I guess in that way my doorway may be through compassion into metta.
And currently in Australia we've just had a terrible terrorist attack on a Jewish community who's celebrating the first night of Hanukkah at a famous spot, Bondi Beach. And, just taking care of the chitta, a sense of the devastation, the pain, the hatred that can bring this about, all of that, the ignorance. But then there's the people who stepped forward to protect others. The woman who lay on a little girl, her own child was taken off by her husband to safety. She lies on a little girl until little girl's family come. The man who tackled one of the gunmen, and so on. So there are ways to turn our attention to goodness that doesn't deny all the other that goes on, but takes us back to refuge.
Yeah, thank you both. Just also in that essay by Willa in Awakening Presence, you have this line which kind of is very much in line with what you're saying now, in terms of, at least in the framing of metta, just accepting, what is right now, being with what is. But there's a line in that there are no demons. There are no demons. And how do you hold that sentiment? I mean, it seems like a very good device for working with metta, for opening up one's heart. But when you do, as Eliza is pointing to, like you have, extreme anger and violence in the world, and even like in a Buddhist conceiving of things, in early Theravada, you do have this figure of Mara and actually real demons on one level. And so does this teaching that there are no demons, is that a skillful means with specific boundaries, or do you feel like there is a helpful time or place in practice to actually acknowledge that there are kind of negative, kind of harmful, violent forces that one should be wary of, or is it just no demons all the time?
Well, I think there are harmful forces here, but there are no demons. So the sense that everything arises due to conditions. Yeah. So things aren't, they're not fixed. Everything is in movement, everything's a verb. So that people can concretize and harden around these ideas rather than actually coming into, well, what actually is happening here? Where does this come from? Because if we make demons, we're in real trouble. Where if we see the conditionality of things, we become supremely committed to generating skillful conditions. Yeah. And rather than coming with anger to hatred, we come with compassion. We know, hatred does not see through hatred, only through love. This is the eternal law. So to see conditionality to me is really the pathway. And then something becomes clearer and clearer to me is this kind of coming into the uju, the embodied uprightness of the heart, and really not believing any leaning out into ill will or grasping or anything, in a way, stealing and making things out of things. So my more now sets it not to make anything out of anything, and to keep the heart really upright, come out of that. The idea of a demon is a grasping, and it's an unhelpful grasping, and to abandon that, upright in the heart.
Very helpful perspective, and I feel like both of you are very good both at the uju and the mudu. So the uprightness and the softness, you kind of both embody that in at least my own interactions with both of you. And I'm curious, this way that you're speaking, Willa, does kind of just remind me, just reading your biography, Eliza, that you got a doctorate in intersubjectivity and have practiced Gestalt psychotherapy. And did either one of those inform your practice? It sounded like when you were giving your biography earlier that you got those before you were so much into meditation, but maybe I missed that. And so how do those terms, do they play into your understandings of intersubjectivity and Gestalt or whole picture awareness? Do those affect in a positive way? Are there skillful means that you've taken from those domains into your meditative practice or teaching?
The short answer to that would be yes. Slightly longer answer is I did actually complete my doctorate before. I'd done some counsellor training, but before I trained in Gestalt psychotherapy. In fact, I trained in that after I left the monastery as a direct result of experiences in the monastery. With a kind of, the community was growing and developing in its understanding of psychological health and well-being. But I found it quite concerning that each year we'd have, groups of lay people coming in to support the winter retreat. And it wasn't uncommon for each year someone had to have a psychotic break, which is quite hard on the brain. It's not something to encourage. It can be seen as a spiritual breakthrough as well. but it's a pretty intense way to do that. And there's something about coming into a space that's got a lot of charge in it, and some degree spiritual purity developing in it, and to come into that unready, we know that the challenges of that, the importance of ethics in the practice, ethical life living, but mental health is also really supportive. I've often wondered about sometimes the simple phrases in the suttas, like I'll broaden the gender, but a person of a good family, sits at the root of a tree and establishes mindfulness before them. And I've often thought about that good family and the translation of it, and that it can seem, privileged in some ways, or who knows, classist, clanist. But there's something about, if we take it more broadly, someone who's got supports. I don't mean material supports, someone who's actually ready to sit at that root of a tree and do the inquiry, and what helps us to be ready. And relative mental health is a great support. And having said that, lots of people come to the path through overcoming or working through anxieties, depressions, and so on. There's no stigma around any of that. But yes, having been through living in community and seeing some of the challenges that were there, I thought it would be a useful way to spend the latter part of my life while cultivating Dhamma myself, to support people to clear away what gets in the way of Dhamma practice. So in that sense, I have found some of the insights, especially around intersubjectivity and embodiment, really supportive for myself and for clients. And I do find I only have a small psychotherapeutic practice at the moment because I'm a full-time academic, and I teach yoga and meditation, so there's not a lot of space left in the days or weekends. But I've found that I'm not applying a Buddhist intervention deliberately with clients. I'm open to whoever comes through the door, but almost inevitably as they go through their process, they loosen up and open up and start to inquire spiritually. So I do see it as a supportive pathway. It's a pretty European-oriented practice, psychotherapy in particular, and I think that we all come out of contexts, and the context for a lot of Western-trained minds has some loss in it around community and has some alienation in it. And so I see these practices as supports not for sharpening a self, but for supporting clarity and that trembling, quivering, allowing someone to come into their strength and sense of safety, and then all sorts of things open up.
We've touched on some of the kind of darker, more tender pieces of or threads of life, and I find it's very refreshing, this movement in Buddhism where you're allowed to touch the earth, as you said, and then something rises and it becomes, there's plenty of sparkle and brightness right there as well, and certainly you two embody that. So we're coming towards the end of our time and haven't done nearly enough of it, but I didn't want to end without asking about any deva stories or kind of stories of extra serendipity which we might be able to draw out of you two. Any sparkle for us?
That's quite confronting. There's plenty, but it's quite confronting how much to share into this context.
We can also ask a different question or edit this out, but we wanted to put it out there just to see.
Well, mostly I don't talk about that level of stuff because there can be a lot of misunderstanding, but one of the sweetest times of feeling the energies of the devatas was when I was in Bodh Gaya on pilgrimage, and it had taken a lot of work. It was the hot season, it was Vaisakha Puja, but I'd got permission to sit all night under the Bodhi tree. And for various karmic reasons, I was allowed inside the gates. So actually just able to be there. Only one there apart from 4 men with big sticks. And then in the morning, the kind of sweepers and attendants came, and they were going to be hauling water out of a kind of well to water the Bodhi tree. So just as I'd helped them with the sweeping, which was radical for them, I took over the watering of the Bodhi tree. And I felt such gratitude and love as I was pouring the water on the tree. And then I heard all the devatas. They were so pleased that I was there. It was just so, it still feels moving, that sense of the beings that rejoice in our goodness and really feeling their tremendous excitement. Yeah. There are very special places, and there are beings who really rejoice in our faith and our gratitude and the very wholesome qualities of heart. So,
Thank you, both of you.
Yeah. And Eliza, anything you'd be willing to share?
Yeah. All the cool kids are doing it.
Oh, well, in that case, I get my ticket in. A few brief ones in a way. I love this mudra of touching the earth and the earth responding. And I think, pantheists weren't entirely wrong, aren't entirely wrong. No, deep movement is, and the earth does respond. I know I've had, very important questions for myself in my life where I've said, okay, this thing's driving me crazy. I need to know if this is the case, let a butterfly come and land on my left shoulder, and that happening. And you'd think, what are the odds of that? And then there's this response of, oh yeah, that sense that you're not alone in your aspirations and in your, that there's a connectedness that we're not seeing, and beings respond through form as well. And at this Dharmic stupa in Sarnath, that's a place very special to me. When I first went on that pilgrimage with Rakita, Tara, and a group from the Buddhist Society of Victoria back in the 90s. And I remember just sitting by the stupa and touching my hand to the earth in mimicry of the Buddha and feeling the earth, feeling the vibrations through the earth. You're here, you belong, a kind of sense of, yes, this happened here, just this strong rumbling up through the earth and up through my body that gave me a sense beyond thought and words of the connectedness of realms, and that we don't know all that is to be known, but we are held in something that is supporting our movement toward awakening. And then more recently on the pilgrimage that I took a group through in November this year, November-December, we were at an ashram of Neem Karoli Baba, and very beautiful energy there at that ashram, even though people have now moved through barriers quite quickly, and there are guards with whistles if you stay too long. So beneath all of that noise, and in respect of all the different people who want to go there, two of the people on my group received a very clear message, one got a very strong message about the person standing beside them, conveyed it, and something quite profound, was opened up. So that sense of going in with a commitment, an open heart, and a commitment to awakening and an openness to forces does allow forces to move through. The weirdest one on pilgrimage for me 5 years ago was when I put my credit card into an auto teller machine, and it went clunk, clunk, and it got swallowed up. And I thought, oh dear, this is complicated. I was in the middle of a transaction, but also I needed access to funds, and went back to my room, and I just reflected on pilgrimage and opened up and recognized, well, things happen, that's all right. And I went back the next day and asked them to check in the machine, and there was nothing there. And I opened my wallet, and the card that I had seen swallowed up was there in my wallet. And I thought, well, there are beings that support people who are focused in on paying homage to the sacred sites.
It's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It means a lot.
Yes, some people might hear that and think it's airy-fairy, but I think there's something grounded. I mean, a lot of the stories that you just told really are like physically grounded, watering the roots of the Bodhi tree or touching the earth in different ways. And there's a sutta, which kind of I've noticed in your teachings pop up over decades. So in one of your early talks that's recorded, Willa, you mentioned the Mulaka Sutta, which is about all dharmas have their root in craving. This is Anguttara 8.83. And this is the subject of both of your most recent retreat at Cloud Mountain. And it's a fascinating sutta. I encourage everybody to read it. And one of the latter phrases has always been a bit interesting for me, and I'm curious to hear both of your takes on it. And that line is that vimutti sara sabbe dhamma. So all things have vimutti, or liberation or freedom, as their essence, or as their heartwood, or as their core. So what does that mean, that all things have liberation as their core?
Well, everything is Dhamma, isn't it? And everything has the qualities of the Dhamma, in terms of three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta. So everything is pointing to the unconditioned. And everything is, in a way, disbanding and revealing Nibbāna. The very essence of everything is emptiness. So the sutta is a real teaching and understanding, grasping, and what my experience is that the very grasping of the mind means we cannot see what's also here. Like Kihikihi talks about Nibbāna is as close as your face. You're just not seeing it yet. So back to the Gestalt, my experience, the very grasping of the mind means in those Gestalt pictures, we're just seeing the young lady with the hat, and the eyes, the grasping of the eyes means we cannot see what also is there. But if we let everything soften and relax out of grasping, all of a sudden there's the crone, the old lady is there. She was there all the time. So it is the same, that the work is really to come out of this leaning and stealing, you could call it. Ajahn Paul calls it stealing. The way we lean out and grasp everything as self, when that relaxes, something else that was always there is revealed. And the sutta is taking us through this deep process of seeing and letting go. We're not constructing anything, we're just letting go of what is in the way.
Yes, I almost have an image in my mind of in the wind, a kind of, let's say, a piece of paper or something drifting in the wind, turning this way and that way, in on itself, knotted, entangled, and then it lets go. There's a kind of sense of a smoothing out. Upassakiki's phrasing of an unentangled knowing, all outward going knowing cast aside, that for me cuts to the heart of this piece of this sutta. That sense of awareness and form entangled is where all the trouble is. That's where all suffering is, that grasping, that entanglement of consciousness with its objects, or awareness with form. And when form is seen as such, there's a release, and we're back to refuge. So again and again, I'm not saying anything different really from what Willa's just shared, but that the truth, the heart of reality is awakened. And it's the appropriation of nature by mind, by chitta. The appropriation of what doesn't belong is where all the trouble starts.
Yeah, the conjuring trick of consciousness, to use one of the Buddha's similes.
So Ajahn Mahabhu's, go ahead.
No, please, please.
Well, it brings me back to another area of focus for me and for us in our teachings is Ajahn Mahabua, actually, and his particular teachings on chitta, I think, are really important. They've been really helpful in my practice. And his enlightenment discourse that's, available on YouTube really blows me away. And I've watched it many, many times and held it as a recollection how he, relentlessly pursues any sense of positionality or point of view. Even that great luminosity that had him bewitched for some time, he starts to see it has a center, and anything with a center, it's not free, it's not released. And he just zeroes in again and again and again until it's seen. And when it's seen, the whole thing breaks apart. It's very moving, and it's almost a textbook description of the Buddha's awakening as well. I find that's where I take true inspiration, that description and that way of working that holds a kind of hermeneutics of suspicion of any selfing, any positionality or locality.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll see if we can put a link to that talk. That the word for that center is duapop. Duapop is the Thai of bhava. So it's like the point of becoming or the point of being. And when you solidify around that, that's where all the samsara is from. So
Not the Pope. I'm the language you used about all things are disbanding, revealing Nibbāna. I just find that so beautiful, and for me, it really echoes the trajectory of this conversation. Touching kind of the brokenness of the world and all these things, and then that invoking loving kindness and a reaction, and then the brightness of these other really wholesome elements we touch with the path, the devas and more. Gestalt therapy also there, and then coming to liberation in the end. And I just want to honor that conversation you two had with us and being so honest and authentic through it all. We're very grateful for the connection and for the gift you both have given the world and continue to. Please visit us in Seattle soon, and we wish you all the best in this year of retreat as well.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.
It's lovely.
Thanks for all that you do.
Yeah.